If there's one thing in our culture that we are particularly bad at right now, I think in the West, it's sitting down and having a long, robust conversation with somebody that thinks differently than us. I think we just really have gotten good at insulating ourselves with voices that say what we already agree with. And for that reason, I think we've actually gotten a lot dumber and a lot less loving along the way. Part of, I think, what should define us as Christians is that we have such confidence in the gospel and confidence in Christ that we are willing to sit down and talk to people that don't necessarily believe the gospel in the same way that we do, or believe the Bible with a sense of authority in their life. I think in order to do that, though, it takes a few ingredients. For one, I think it takes relationship. It means having enough relational equity with someone that when you disagree with them or you tell them something that they maybe don't believe, that they can absorb it. Secondly, I think it takes time. It takes time more than a 3-minute YouTube dialogue conversation that may be more entertaining but less helpful can really provide. And thirdly, I would also say it takes listening. And I think a lot of times the reason we're so poor at sharing the gospel is because we don't actually listen to what someone actually believes. It's like a doctor trying to diagnose a cancer when he hasn't taken the appropriate tests to figure out exactly what type of cancer it is or where it even lives. And so I'm hoping to model that for you in a way that maybe will be encouraging. And Trever Yarrish, who is a friend of mine who owns this hive that we release on Sunday mornings, him and I have created a friendship, and we have different views about the authority of the Bible and about maybe the person and the lordship of Christ. But what we do have is we have a good friendship, and we're able to sit down and have good dialogue about what we do or do not believe and questions that we may have. And so we decided to sit down and record one of those for you. And what I hope that you'll gain from this is not that I have all the answers and not that I'm even able to answer all of Trevor's questions, but just that it is possible to sit down with someone who doesn't believe the Bible in the same way that you do and to actually have a civil and robust dialogue that can even end sometimes in still not believing the same thing. It doesn't always have to be a frustrating debate. So hopefully that'll encourage you. And I know that we live in a soundbite culture with an attention span of about 3 minutes, but if you have the time and if you're able to tune in for the whole thing, there are some interesting points, I think, in here that both of us make. And I hope that it'll give you maybe a little bit of a window into the way that some people think that don't believe exactly what you believe, so that we can better nurture and better deliver the gospel in a more accurate and a more helpful way to those that don't believe it. So may this be a blessing to you. In Jesus' name, enjoy.
There's some real big topical things that I'm just really curious about. I've been curious about for a long time, and I really respect your just your path of learning, and you seek truth, and you also are extremely strong in your faith. And so that combination is, I think, something that I admire a lot in you, and I also respect and honor, and I want to, and again, it's an opportunity to me to sort of gain some perspective from you.
Awesome. Well,
So,
thank you. That's my praise.
One thing that is sometimes hard to tease apart, and we might get into a little bit, is this sort of dichotomy between religion and belief systems and philosophy, right? So they intersect when it comes to morality and ethics and things like that. So we might end up, some of these are borderline philosophy things, but when I dig into that, it seems like maybe for Christians, philosophy is very much tied into the belief system. Like that determines philosophy, right? Is what it feels like. So I'll just, no softball questions here. All right. These are all, I'm just going to start right out.
Sounds good.
I sort of broke these into some topical areas.
Okay.
So, with so many religious, groups or churches, claiming to be the true church, worshiping the one true God, right? And I'm sure this is one that comes across a lot. But the part that I struggle with is how can anyone coming into a setting, a church, for instance, for the first time, know which is the right one to follow?
Yeah.
Like, how do you know?
Right.
Because there's claims that this is the right one, this is the one true God, this is the one truth. And how do you know when that's right or real?
It's a great question. And I think it's probably the most important question you could answer. And first of all, I love that you and I agree on something, and that is that there is truth, right? Mm-hmm. And a lot of people in our current setting, in our world, they don't believe that there is ultimate truth. They believe truth is relative, right? So even the fact that you would ask me that question, I think is cool, because I think it's admitting that there is truth and that we are on a journey as humans to figure that out. And so that's cool. But I think, first of all, what's helpful for me is admitting that you can't avoid believing something. I think a lot of people have this wrong idea that there is neutrality, that neutrality is an option, that, I can just sort of believe nothing and therefore I'm neutral. But I think for me, everyone needs to start at this place where you go, no, everyone's believing something. There is no neutrality when it comes to belief. And so therefore, so for example, so even the secular atheist who says, I don't believe that there is any higher power or God or anything, that we weren't created, that everything is sort of accidental. Even them, to some degree, are leaping in faith and believing in their particular perspective, and they're believing in science, or they're believing or being shaped by someone's thinking that has led them to believe that. So even atheism is a belief system. Even a secular person who says, I'm not religious, their religion oftentimes is science or whatever. It may not be in the same wrapper, but it's the same consistency. Ultimately, it's the idea that I'm informing my reality based off of a truth I've accepted. But because none of us have all knowledge, all of us at some point are leaping in faith. Would you agree with that? Because none of us know everything in the universe. Right. All of us are left to some degree to choose to believe something. And so for me, when I have this conversation with people, I try to get to them. I try to get them to that place first. Are you willing to admit that you cannot go through life without having to choose to believe something? And if you can admit that, then that changes things a little bit, because then the question isn't, how do I know what truth is? The question is, which truth claim is the most likely? Does that make sense? If none of us can possibly hope to be able to prove everything empirically, because none of us have all knowledge, then the question then becomes, well, which truth claim is the most likely? And that's where I think all of us as humans all stand on equal footing, is sort of the burden of proof is on everybody. And so I look at it that way. Can I prove empirically in every detail that my truth is the singular truth? I can't prove everything, because there's some measure of faith with everything, but I think it's the most likely. I think that Christianity gives the most likely answers to the primary questions of humanity, which is, why are we here? How did we get here? Basically, what are we supposed to do over here? Those kinds of questions. I think every worldview has to answer those questions. And I think Christianity gives the most logical answers to those questions. Now, the other thing is I made the statement, nobody has all wisdom and knowledge in the universe, right? Except the one that created it, if you accept that someone created it. And so I know, and I believe that I don't have all wisdom and knowledge in the universe, but I also believe that that God does, and that God has the only authority to actually reveal ultimate truth is the one who created all things, the one that has all wisdom and knowledge. And so I believe that he did that. And that's why for Christians, we are people of the book, because we really stake everything on the fact that God has expressed truth through his word and through his son, Jesus Christ, which are both the expression of his eternal mind through the word and through Jesus. And so really everything to me, all roads lead back to the Bible and the validity of the Bible, and all roads in the Bible lead ultimately to the person of Jesus Christ, because Jesus affirmed the Bible in its totality. He affirmed the Old Testament. He affirmed his own message, obviously, claiming to be God himself. I mean, make no mistake, that was the claim of Christ. So if Jesus is who Jesus said he was, then the Bible is what the Bible claims to be. And if the Bible is what it claims to be, then there is ultimate truth, and that ultimate truth is expressed in his word. Does that make sense? So for me, and many Christians, I think we push people to the resurrection of Christ. Because if Jesus really resurrected, then he was who he said he was. And if he was who he said he was, the Bible is what it is, what it claims to be, et cetera, et cetera. So really all roads lead back to the resurrection. If Jesus raised from the dead, then he clearly was who he claimed to be. And some people push back on that. I heard, I forget his name. Anyways, somebody the other day was pushing back on that, but lots of people were resurrected in the Bible. And that's true, but none of them claimed to be God. See, Jesus claimed to be God, and if he was resurrected by God, then that affirms his claim that God actually put his stamp of approval on Jesus and his message. So it may seem like an oversimplification, but that's where I kind of funnel people. I go, okay, start big. Is there truth? Okay, there's truth. Well, can you avoid belief in this world? No, you can't avoid belief in this world. Okay, so then what's the most likely? Well, God expresses truth. If there is a God and he has expressed truth, which truth claim is the most likely? You know what I mean? And kind of go, from there. I don't know if that answers or not, if that's too broad.
It is an answer. And I guess the thing that comes to mind, and again, this is why I asked the question, is because the way that the answer is framed, first of all, there's a lot of structure in there that I think is very informing, and they're in a good way, meaning there's a good logical set of conclusions, right? Couple things that hit me that, again, are just hard for me to reconcile is, there's a lot of ifs in there that, again, for you that if may be a solid yes to you, but coming into it, if it's not a solid yes, it's an if. And so, again, what it feels like when it comes down to, we all have beliefs, and if we all have beliefs, what's the most logical? It still feels lucky to get it right.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like it's luck. It is or whatever, and because there's massive repercussions to getting that wrong.
Yeah.
To being wrong in this choice.
Right.
The repercussions are massive. And so that's, again, I struggle with that because I look around and I see a lot of paths.
Yeah.
And doing exploration down some of these paths, I'd say I've done a very shallow exploration down many paths. I've done some deeper exploration down some of the paths. And at the end of the day, it often comes down to this sort of conclusion, right? Yeah. And that's where it's hard. It's like, well, how is one to know?
Right.
And if you don't know, then what?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, it is hard to think about that, even for Christians, like that there are people, according to our belief system, that are going to perish because they don't believe, but I think there are a lot of ifs, but I think where I didn't drill down maybe hard enough is the validity of the proof of the resurrection, right? And I think that's where Christianity gets a lot of traction. Jesus's message was not acceptable or popular, really, because it was such a polarizing message. He really came onto the scene, and a lot of people like to paint Christ like he was just sort of this hippie that, loved everybody, and he never said anything offensive. In fact, he actually said completely the opposite. If you look at his words in the New Testament, I mean, I came not to bring peace, I came to bring war.
Oftentimes kick people out and just he was there was the love, but there was also he was there to, there was a purpose.
Right.
A massive purpose in being there.
Yeah. And I think I think where it gets hard sometimes is it depends on how you view humanity. If you view humanity as sort of this neutral entity that is basically good and all deserve to go to heaven, then the gospel seems very unfair, because it sort of says, well, then the people that happen to believe in Christianity get to escape some kind of eternal hell, and that just seems very unfair. But it only seems unfair if you assume that humanity is basically good, and that if left to itself, it would basically choose good. That's not exactly the way the Bible would paint it. So when Jesus says he came not to bring peace, I mean, he was the Prince of Peace, but in one sense, but in another sense, he came to divide. He said he basically came to start a new kingdom, because the kingdom of man is ultimately at war with God. Now, I know this is all hard to swallow, but this is really the biblical paradigm, is that humanity from Adam forward has been by nature in rebellion towards God, worshiping anything and everything other than God, giving glory and credit to anything and everything other than God. And it was only because of God's kindness that he chose Abraham to be his, and to start a new sub race, if you will, which we now call the Jews, to be his people. But even those people that God chose, I mean, if you read the Old Testament, it's just a perpetual cycle of disobedience, and just really wickedness. Even God's people, right? Even those that he covenanted with are constantly like sacrificing their kids to pagan gods and bringing idols into the temple and just disobeying. I mean, the heart is so bent against serving and obeying the Lord. And so God is patient with Israel. But ultimately what the Old Testament teaches us is that humanity, if left to itself, cannot fix itself, because humanity is so deeply intrinsically broken, because it has been disconnected from God. And in the New Testament basically says there's two kinds of humans. There's the race of Adam, which is essentially by nature at war with God. And there's a new race, which is now the race of Jesus. Jesus becomes a new Adam, and starts a new humanity. And so where I think Western minds really struggle with, including my own, with the idea that there's only one truth and only those on that path, are going to escape, hell. We really struggle with that because we have believed this idea that humans are basically good from birth, and that we all sort of deserve heaven. The Christian paradigm is quite different. It's actually, we are all born into sin, and we're sinners by nature and by choice, meaning we were born inheriting a sin gene, but we also, even aside from that, Adam proved that humanity by nature would choose sin rather than God. So the whole Old Testament is proving man's inability to choose what is right, to do what is right. And I mean, we have 6,000 years of human history to prove that humanity is not getting any better. We're getting more educated, but we're not getting any better. We're still killing each other. There's still so much of the evil that has been rampant. And the Bible is basically saying God's ultimate goal is to completely renovate humanity and the earth. But in order to do that, he has to start over with humanity. And he does that through Christianity, by people being transferred from a kingdom of darkness into a kingdom of light. And so we believe as Christians, when you get saved, you actually, your heart that was turned against God in that moment is born again and transformed into a heart that now is serving God and now is ruled by God. And so I guess I say all that to say, I think that's where, and I know everything I said is so controversial in our current context. It just sounds crazy, but in reality, the Bible makes no qualms about claiming that humans by nature are at odds with the Lord, and that humans by nature need to be completely born again. And so I don't necessarily, even though it feels unfair in my Western brain to say that God would take these to heaven and these not, I know that's only because I've been sort of spoon-fed this idea that all humanity is basically good from birth, and that we all sort of deserve heaven. I think there's a lot of ifs in it if you believe that it's up to us entirely as humans to save God, to save. But I actually believe that God ultimately is the one who saves, that God actually is the one seeking after humans. And God is actually the one pursuing humanity, pursuing individuals. So that it's really, largely his work. So like, it's not like you're sort of like needle in a haystack. Like if you're lucky, you find it and you get to go to heaven. Otherwise you're damned. Right. I think God is actually actively pursuing all humans he's actually pursuing them with the truth, and putting people in their path and putting truth in their path. And even though humanity is sort of hardwired to rebel against God, God is graciously pursuing his own to bring them into his family, which is extremely gracious.
So I'm gonna take a leap into my personal seeking, I guess, or questioning. And that is, I'm having a very hard time reconciling seeking, the whole sort of crux of seeking truth is very knowledge-based. It's very heady, right? And it feels like, from the accounts that I receive from Christians, different believers of different belief systems, it has nothing to do with knowledge, or very little to do with knowledge. It has to do with, like, if you're seeking knowledge, you're moving in the wrong direction. If you're seeking with your heart, or you're seeking with, like this openness to be filled, right? Or, but then, what is, that's the part, it's like, the more seeking I do, the less clear it gets.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of ways I can answer. I actually think that there is a knowledge that transcends your cognitive ability.
Yeah.
And that's called heart knowledge. And many times when the Old Testament authors use the word heart, they mean mind. And the two, in many ways, are interchangeable, because I think there are levels of think, right? There's levels of thinking. But the reality is what you're saying, in a sense, almost confirms what I said earlier, and that is that humanity, in and of itself, cannot save itself. And I believe that humanity cannot come to the truth by themselves. So this is where we get into the sovereignty of God. But I believe that God has to reveal truth, that he reveals truth to us, that those that are seeking him or looking ultimately are blind. I mean, where they're stumbling around. And while humans sort of have...
That's what it feels like.
Yeah. Well, there's an inclination for a desire for truth that I think God planted within humanity. We're created in his image. We're created for eternal things. And so by nature, I think as humans, we long for the eternal, but we are stumbling in the dark. And ultimately, I believe God reveals truth and turns the light on.
Mm-hmm.
At some
so
point.
What happens to me right now if the rapture were to happen?
Well, it depends on if you believe the gospel or not. If you haven't believed the gospel, and assuming that there is a rapture, and assuming that, we take the literal interpretation of the book of Revelation, then you have another opportunity through 7 years of pretty gnarly stuff that's gonna happen.
Right. The interesting part about that is just the notion that the idea of a literal rapture feels like a lot of evidence for those left behind. Feels like it would be really hard to deny.
Oh, yeah.
The rapture.
My mom has a funny take on that. She's like, I think everyone's going to say it was aliens. The aliens have abducted people. What's incredible to me is humans' ability to continue to not believe something when they don't want to. I think humans.
I feel like I don't believe. It's not that I don't want to. It's that it's not presented itself in a way that's believable to me.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
No,
This is what I hope I'm not conveying is a lack of respect for what you believe.
No,
right?
No, you're far from that.
That I have no judgment about, when it comes to this topic, what you believe. on it. I am to, and maybe some of the answer actually lies in what I actually am doing here right now. Is it actually seeking, right?
Yeah.
I feel like I'm always truth seeking. I don't know that I'm seeking to be saved, right?
Right.
I don't, and that's the thing that I guess I wrestle with is, I feel love in my life. I feel compassion. I feel pain. I feel all of the, those sort of human heart feelings, and I feel deeply. And I also work really hard, and this is where philosophy versus belief systems, like, I think if you look at the, say, the rule of God, there's a lot of basic philosophical truth to the rule of God as well. Meaning, if you extracted God from it, right and wrong, that is, maybe there is no right and wrong without God. I don't know. But I know that I have a feeling of right and a feeling of wrong. And that's how I operate in the world, right? And I try really hard to bring good and to curb bad. Like, of course, I've got compulsions and things like that that are not, that I don't deem as being good, and I don't act on those. And so, this kind of leads down a path of, there's sort of a fork in the road, and there's two different topical points. One is good and evil, and then the other sort of leg of that fork is love and hate. And if you were to pick a path, what path do you want to go down right now?
Well, I want to back up and speak to what you were saying. I think, sometimes you have to ask the question, how much bad can God allow and still be good? Because I think.
Well, why does God allow any if he's omniscient? Like, if he is omnipotent, like, why is there bad? Why is there, or are you acknowledging, is there evil? Does evil exist?
Well, yeah. I believe evil exists.
Well, I ask that because some Christians don't believe evil exists.
Oh, wow. Yeah, no, I think, definitely. There's a cosmic battle going on,
Sure.
So
and what spawned that? If God created heaven and earth, and God is all powerful, all knowing, all present.
Yeah.
Why bad? Why evil?
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a question that is above any human's pay grade, but the Bible hints at it. I think maybe you and I have talked about this before. The Bible kind of hints at it. And I think that, there is something that God is revealing about himself. And there's something that God is doing that is eternally valuable that can only happen through redemption, as opposed to God just creating a sort of perfect robotic world. So there's something that happens, and I don't pretend to be able to know what that is. How could I possibly know? God has purposes that are he created a cosmos that we can't possibly understand. So his purposes are not our purposes. His thoughts are not our thoughts. He has all kinds of things that we could possibly never understand. But I think that it says in Ephesians that God is revealing something about his nature that had never been revealed before. And that is, his grace. And I'm not going to get into the free will and God's sovereignty thing, but there's a case I think to be made that God wanted a people that he didn't just simply program like the angels to be perfect, but a people that had actually chosen him. A people that had experienced evil, and because they had experienced evil, would be able to treasure and worship God in a way that the angels never could, because the angels have never experienced any kind of evil. There's fallen angels, obviously, but they were created in such a way where they had never experienced forgiveness. And it says the angels sort of look with curiosity at God's forgiveness over human beings. Now, I know you could say, well, isn't that kind of cruel of God to create a universe so that it would fall, so that he could show off his own glory? Well, I don't know if I can't really tell him that he's right or wrong because he's God. I don't know. I know that he programmed me with an idea of what is right and wrong, but so why would he program me with something that tells me that what he's doing is wrong? I don't know. You know what I mean? You can go in that circle and that cycle. But I also believe that God knows there is nothing greater for humanity than himself. And there's nothing more enjoyable for humanity than sharing himself with humanity. And if there's a piece of himself he can only share through forgiveness and redemption, rather than sort of just pre-programming us for perfection, then there may be something really weighty that he's doing, something really valuable, something really eternal that he's doing by allowing the world to be what it is. But again, I'm dealing in shadows and thoughts.
I guess the big issue is that it's not just a piece, right, of him that he's sharing through redemption. It is heaven or hell. It literally is the difference between going in one direction or the other is the redemption, right? It's only through that redemption in Christ,
the New
Christ,
Testament would say
that you can
Christ alone.
And so that puts a lot on that.
It does.
It puts a lot on that.
It really does.
And that is, again, I have a hard time reconciling the image of God, including so much of that.
Yeah.
Because to me, the thing that's been revealed to me in life and through the life I've experienced this far is love and compassion being the truth. And that's through what I feel. And when I'm in the presence of love and when I'm in the presence of that, that genuine compassion where I care as much about you as I care about me, that feels like the highest truth, the highest sense of what God is to me. That's what, and so the idea that there's all of these, there's these predetermined, these precursors, there's these other elements that are requirements. They feel like constructs that are unnecessary. They feel like constructs created by people who don't, who are struggling themselves, right? They're struggling themselves and trying to reconcile that struggle. And so they're creating rules or they're creating other constructs in order to get past that. I mean, the human nature, we dive into the idea that, there's a battle inside of all of us happening, right? That right, wrong, good, believe or not believe, all of those things that we're dealing with internally. And the highest, purest presentation being that love that's bigger than me. And this is also where I struggle with that the construct as well around why, there's this notion of God creating man and requiring man to worship him. And also wanting to and you said you didn't really want to get into free will. That's a whole, that is a free will determination, these different, philosophies or constructs of understanding. Those play into this conversation heavily, right? Because if it's all predetermined, then I'm just cruising, right? I'm on a roller coaster. Great.
You're just a robot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's another interesting piece, though. Am I a robot or am I a marble in the Rube Goldberg machine, right? There's meaning this thing happens, which causes this thing to happen, it's chain reaction, right?
Yeah.
And it's massive. It's infinitely large amount of reactions, right? That lead to that construct of determination. It doesn't necessarily mean I don't have a mind in it. It just means that there's so much creating the outcome that I'm not in control of it. So that's determination. We're talking about free will. and that God created free will for us because he was seeking us to make the choice to worship him. And to me, when I think about things that I work to overcome, it is this notion of needing someone to worship me, of needing somebody to appreciate me. And, like that need, it's a thing, it's a trait that we as humans work to overcome, like getting attention and living through getting attention, right? Making that be an intentional purpose of why I do things is to get attention. And that's one of the great things to overcome in life, I believe, is like, that's not why you should do things, is to get attention. That might be a byproduct, but that's not the purpose. Whereas here in this conversation, this part of the conversation, it feels like part of the purpose of a lot of these things, free will, some of these things, is that we make the choice to worship God, and that we were actually created to worship him. That's like the whole point of what we were made for. So why, like that doesn't feel right. That is hard for me to wrap my head around and understand to a point where I could choose to believe it. Right. And this is another question I have, which is just like believing things that don't make sense to you. Do you believe anything that doesn't make sense to you?
Well, I think that I believe things that feel like they are incompatible within the natural or created universe. But I think we all kind of do. I mean, I think we all,
kind of have to, right?
The whole universe is a miracle. I mean, there's the fact that my body's working right now. I don't understand how it's working, and you know what I mean? But I know it is, and
yeah. I
don't really get how my eyeball is focusing right now, and my brain is, semi-thinking, semi-effective. I don't understand all that, but I believe it, But bringing it back around, I think you said it. I mean, we were created for God and for God alone, and anything short of living for God is a misuse of what we were created for. And I think what gets confusing is, all of the things that you said as human being, that you do as a human being, you do those because you're created in the image of a God that's loving. The reason you experience love and you have a desire for love and to be loved and to love, and even though I don't want to overstate our fallenness as human beings. We're also image bearers of God. And so we have these kind of built-in proclivities and desires for children and marriage and community and all those kinds of things. I mean, humans are mixed bags, right? We have the ability to do amazing things. Mm-hmm. We have the ability to do very evil things. And that's the reality of being a human being that was created in the image of God, but is now in a fallen state. That is now sort of disconnected from God. And I think you would probably admit, as a human being, the idea of just sort of doing good isn't enough. It's like the people go through their whole life chasing being good or doing good or loving, but at the end of the day, that's still very empty, because it's like, why? Like, what if you spent your whole life doing philanthropy and being generous and loving people, but then you die and that's it? Well, who cares? I've talked about this before. Like, who cares? So for me, it's like,
but I have that same question. So that question's unanswerable for me, right? When you ask that question, why? But why? I don't have an answer to that. Mm-hmm. As is true about anybody I ask about why are we created to worship God? Why is that our purpose? And the answer is that we don't know that. It's above our pay grade to know why God created us.
I could say this though. I could say, put yourself in God's shoes. If you were the ultimate value and ultimate power and ultimate everything in the universe, creating people to do anything other than worship yourself would be unloving. Do you follow that?
No.
So if there's nothing greater than you, if you are the ultimate value and riches and joy and everything, there's nothing better to give someone than yourself. If you're God, then calling anybody to anything other than yourself would be less than loving. If I have $1 billion, but I give you $50, that's less valuable than the $1 billion. If there's nothing more valuable than God himself, then worshiping anything other than God is actually unloving. The most loving thing he can do is to draw you to love him and to worship him. So if he is eternal and omnipotent and omnipotent and glory, everything that he claims to be in the Bible, then the most loving thing he can do is share himself with you. And that's why I think we're created for his glory, and anything short of his glory ultimately falls short. Satan is the counter. He's the opposite of God in that he wants people to live for his glory. He wants his own glory. That was the ultimate sin in the garden, right? Was God said, here, I've given you everything you need. And then Satan lies to the humans and says, actually, God's holding back from you. He has something better for you. And then they choose to eat the fruit, right? Instead. And in that moment, they were deciding that they were going to leave worshiping God and trusting God and living in God and lean on their own understanding. And that's been the ultimate sin of humanity ever since, is that man says, I don't want to give God the glory he deserves. I want to live for myself. I want to do things for myself out of my own strength. And what God is trying to do is trying to restore humanity back into the worship of himself. Now, to me, that there's just nothing more loving he could do than to demand the worship of humans, because there's nothing that could satisfy me more than him. Does that make sense? There's nothing that could be more satisfying than the affection that I could get from him. There's no human relationship. There's no affirmation from my wife or my kids. There's nothing I could do out of generosity that would ever fulfill me like he could fulfill me, because he's eternal and he is the source of all power and glory and joy. So for me, I think it's loving for him to demand my worship. And for me to worship anything short of him would almost be like, it's like letting your kid play with a knife. I mean, to say, yeah, go ahead and just worship your stuff or your life or your health or your fitness or your career. God sees that as completely empty. He sees it as not being able to satisfy you. So letting you go play with that is like my kid going to touch the stove. He's just like, so that's why God's ultimate desire for me is that I would be fully satisfied in him, because he's know there's nothing greater than him.
One of the things that I find myself like all of these questions, if I were to take all of these questions, there's the responses to the questions. There's an underlying issue here, the lack of connective tissue between myself, my mind, my heart, and the, where you sit, your faith, your belief. And I feel like, and here's the hard part, and this is why the seeking or the knowledge piece of it is hard for me to swallow. Even though that's what I'm compelled to do. I'm compelled to continue to ask these questions and work to resolve them. But at the end of the day, what is more story doesn't answer the question.
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and I'm reminded of something, and that is the moment that Nicodemus came to Jesus with a similar disposition. You know, he had spent his entire life studying the scriptures. This is the book of John.
John. Okay.
So Nicodemus was sort of a high-ranking Pharisee, so he was like the teacher of teachers, right? He was the he would have the equivalent of probably 3 doctorates today. He was the guy who was lecturing at the seminaries or whatever, seminars. And he sort of has this curiosity about Jesus, because Jesus didn't come quoting other rabbis. He came quoting like he had his own authority, and there's something about him. So Nicodemus comes to Jesus in the middle of the night because he doesn't want anybody to know that he has questions. And I think there's a similarity to the way he's feeling and then maybe the way you're feeling, which is kind of like, man, I've been doing this thing, this Old Testament thing, these rules. I've been following the rules. I've been being a good person. I've achieved the heights of human, but it's like there was still something missing there. And what Jesus tells him is something that he couldn't grasp in his cognitive level. He said, Nicodemus, you need to be born again. And Nicodemus took that literally, and he went, well, how am I going to climb into my mother's womb I don't understand. And then Jesus' indictment of him is, are you not the teacher of Israel and you don't understand these things? And what Jesus was trying to communicate to Nicodemus was, Nicodemus, the point is you can't figure it out. What you need is to surrender. There's a saying yes that goes beyond the cognitive. You're not going to reason yourself into faith. And that doesn't mean we turn our brains off. Don't hear me wrong on that. I think that our faith is reasonable. I think that the faith is to be reasonable, but I think there comes a level where surrender goes beyond your ability to figure out something. You're never going to answer all your questions. But I think when God is calling somebody, he's calling them to surrender at some point and say, okay, I don't have all the answers, but I know, Jesus, that you're the answer. And because you're the answer, I'm going to trust that you're going to teach me the answer. When Jesus approached the disciples, he didn't give them everything. He didn't tell them everything. He just said, come and follow me. And they went, okay. And then they learned and they followed. I mean, there's so much I don't know still. There's so much that I can't answer that you've written down. But I've experienced Christ, and I know that he is the truth. He is the way. And Jesus' call for Nicodemus was for him to be born again. And what that meant for Nicodemus, and he didn't realize it at first, but I think it clicked later. What that meant was, Nicodemus, everything you've ever done in your entire life, it's garbage. It doesn't matter. I want you to be a baby again. And that means that you have to, what does a baby do? It gets its diaper changed. It's completely helpless. It's completely at the mercy of its mom or dad. Nicodemus, even though you're the man, even though you have all the answers you think, and you have all the righteousness, and you've done all the right things, I want you to surrender to the point where you're basically a baby again. And you basically have to completely start over. And your entire life is going to start over with all of yourself now being found in me instead of in who you are and what you've done and what you've accomplished. And that's really what happens when you get saved. You surrender and you say, God, everything I've ever done is rags. It's nothing. Because there's nothing that can compare to you. And so I'm exchanging my life and my righteousness for your righteousness and your love and your grace. And now all that I am and my identity and everything is found in you instead of me. And even though I've done good things, the gospel isn't just about surrendering your sin. It's about surrendering your good deeds too. The good deeds that we think are enough. How many good deeds do we have to do to be enough? Well, we could do good deeds your whole life and it still doesn't feel like enough, because ultimately we were made for more than our own good deeds. So that's what Jesus is trying to get to this Nicodemus. He's saying, you need to be born again. And that came down to surrender, not this. It was beyond his cognitive ability to understand.
No, and this is good. This is progress. I feel like I have surrendered. I feel like I have a lot of questions, but I don't have to know the answer. I'm okay with not knowing the answer. And I don't feel unfulfilled by having question marks in my life. I don't feel sad or pain from having from not knowing. I don't feel like I have to find that answer to these questions. I'm curious, but I don't lose sleep over those questions, right? And so the idea of saying, to me, where I am spiritual, in that it is the most. It's the thing that's presented itself most to me as an answer to how the heck any of this happens, right? Like, it has to, there's something, there's a higher power than the people that anybody I've ever seen, heard, met in the world. There's something beyond this that created this, right? And the truest thing I've found in my life, the thing that resonates in every relationship and everything that I've done or been, the thing that feels and has resonated with me the most is love. And that can, in serving and love, right? This is a lot of the same language. I feel like I've surrendered to having to know the answers as to why. I'm okay with not knowing why. I've also felt like though I fear death, I fear the process of death, I'm not afraid of death. I'm not afraid of, in my mind, the conception of what death means based on my belief system, right? So that's where I'm at right now. And and the reason why I continue down this path and continue with you is because I appreciate the path that you're on, and I feel like I learn a lot about life, and and that some of the why continues to get filled in. I think there is truth in a lot of what is in that book, right? It resonates. A lot of it resonates. And I'm not saying that there's untruth in the book either. But I don't feel what I'm lacking right now is that I have to do anything different. And what that leads to, and this is the thing, I'm okay with this. Other people judge me. Other people who are clearly instructed not to judge me, judge me and declare things about me and what happens to me after I die. I mean, that's on them. It's not their place, but they choose to do it. And they make those declarations. They fear for me. I'm not afraid. That's where I'm at. And again, just to be clear, I am fearful of things in life, right? I have children, I have a wife, I've got friends and family. There's a lot of stuff going on in the world that just sounds awful. The process of death sounds terrible,
sure.
Right?
Yeah.
It's scary.
Yeah, Jesus was afraid of it as well.
But at the end of the day, that's where the fear ends. The fear for me isn't about not knowing. The fear for me isn't about what happens, right? I've surrendered to not having to know that. I'm okay with that. And that's, I get back to when we have conversation, there's a ton that resonates. This word surrender is something that has resonated with me for a long time. And the gospel, when I read it, there's so much, it resonates, right? Love, compassion, that's what the New Testament's about. Serving, that's what we serve, how we choose to serve it. Okay, that's, people can debate that, but just being in service of love and compassion is, to me, it's like when I do it, I don't know that it looks different than when somebody else does it, even though we might believe different things. And so that's what, to me, if the truth is the truth, then how am I wrong? If it just is, if that's true, then why am I wrong? And if I can't know why sin exists or why God created this whole thing, or why Jesus was sent here to redeem, if I can't understand why it is it enough to surrender to say, I'm here to serve it, but I don't understand it. And as a result, I don't feel like I have to do anything towards it or against it. It is. If it's truth, then I don't have to do anything. And so this is that. That's the internal this might be the most honest about it that I've been with anybody, which I appreciate you helping in that way.
Yeah, thanks for being honest.
But that's where if I struggle, it's in the conversations with other people who tell me that the way that I think is not the right way to think. And so I want to seek Well, how do you think? I want to understand how you think, and maybe there's something I can learn there, right? But it's not because I feel like I'm right or wrong. If I felt like I was just right, then I'd just be debating somebody trying to prove that I'm right, and I'd just be trying to prove them wrong. I'd be, that's not what it's about for me. I am okay with what I know. I'm okay with what I don't know. If you tell me that I'm wrong and you've got a truth, I'll listen. And if it reveals itself to me, I'm open to it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think, no, man, thank you.
Deep. Wow.
Thank you for being honest, man, and just laying that all out, and I think maybe this is the last thing I would say is I think that you've found love in this world.
Yeah.
And that's amazing. But my prayer, Trevor, is that you would see the source of love. Because I think love is a great thing, and we have been given this gift by God to be able to experience love, even just as human beings. But what is love? I believe God is love.
Yeah.
And I believe that outside of connecting to Him,
we're only with you.
Yeah.
I do.
Yeah.
I agree God is love. I agree that is the only logical or illogical. That's the only conclusion to reach. That's what I find through any teachings anybody shares with me, or through, and if there is like turmoil in regards to that, it's the things that fly in the face of that. It's the things that show a different side of God that doesn't reconcile with love. Right. And that's hard. And again, at the end of the day, if that is truth, I'm just not meant to understand it. Okay.
Yeah.
Why would the wrath of God, why is there the wrath of God on humanity? Why is that a thing? Why, and if you can control, if it's obvious to me that natural disasters, as we see them and call them, are able to be controlled by God. It's declared many times in the Bible, that in stories, and what metaphorical or not, that is one way that the wrath of God is exposed, right? The flood. There's the different stories that refer to it. Sodom and Gomorrah. Like there's all these different ways in which the elements are utilized, right, to cleanse. So anyways,
well,
now we're getting back into the heady part. I'll let you resolve.
But I just would, so maybe like 6 months ago, my son fell out of his bed and he hit his eyebrow on the corner of a box, right? And it cut it pretty deep. And my wife's like, you gotta take him to the emergency room or whatever. So I did. And he was only 4 at the time. And this might've been like a year ago. I don't know. But I take him to the emergency room and they're like, we're going to have to give him stitches. And so I'm literally, within 10 minutes later, I'm literally holding my son with all of my strength while he screams bloody murder, and the capillaries in his eyes are bursting. And it was traumatic while they gave him this anesthetic and then stitched his eye up and everything. And it was just like, it was exhausting. I think that love is more complex than we could possibly understand. And I think that God's love, from our vantage point, oftentimes looks unloving, but it's only because, like a 4-year-old getting stitches, we can't possibly understand why our dad's holding us down. And we can't possibly understand how God could be doing that. But in reality, He is love, because the only reason we even know what love is because He's allowed us to understand it. The only reason we know what love is because He's created us to be able to conceive of it. And we look at it through a fallen and broken and twisted world. And so we try to understand what He does. But ultimately, love is not a feeling. It's not even something I do. It's a person. And I believe God is love because God is a Trinity. He's love. He's had love and community within the Godhead for all of eternity, the Father and the Son and the Spirit. If God is love and God was just one, then who was He loving before creation? In order for God to be love, He has to be a person. In order for Him to be a person, there has to be someone for Him to love. And I think, but we look at love from a very limited scope. And God sees from he has all wisdom and all knowledge, and his love is perfect. But sometimes his love looks different. But for me, it all comes back to the person of Jesus Christ. Like Jesus was the expression and the access point to the love of God. And I don't want to just fiddle around with sort of the fruit that's fallen on the ground, which is the love I get to feel for my wife and my kids. I want to go to the source of love, which is an eternal connection infusing to the person of God himself. And that's what the gospel, that's what Christianity offers. He allows us as humans to experience and fiddle with sort of the residual feeling of love in this world. But is it ever enough? No, it isn't, because our kids grow up, in our marriages. At some point, our spouse will pass, and at some point, our works are never enough, and we go home wanting to do more, and we retire with a feeling of unfinished. And that's because we were created for something more than this earth has the ability to give us. And I believe that God himself, right, is that person. But dude, thank you for just opening up your heart and being honest. And, I just think a lot of people don't even think about these things. And even if they could, they couldn't express them. And so I just appreciate your willingness and ability to, and I love that we can disagree and still be friends, and you understand, and that I can say, yeah, dude, if the rapture happened or whatever, and the reason I could say that is because I love you, and because I would be a hypocrite if I didn't say that. Right. Because Absolutely. That's what the truth I believe in says. Right. Yeah. And I know that you understand that. It's not a matter of judgment. It's a matter of me just being consistent with what I believe is true. Yeah. But thank you.
I appreciate you, and I love you, and I thank you. Yeah. And, we're all on this journey,
Yeah, man. Yeah. And I'm really, I just love that you're pursuing truth, and I really believe God's going to continue to reveal that, to you. And in the meantime, hopefully our conversations can just be helpful for both of us as we grow and learn and think and try to figure out the complexity of life and everything, man. So
absolutely.
Thanks for being on the podcast,
Thank
Trever.
you.
Really appreciate you, man. All right. Yeah. We'll see you later.